Welcome to Football Conspiracies.
I'm Jared Cole.
And I'm Jared Rabinovich.
This week's episode, The Search for Jimmy Hoffa. Alright, so unfortunately for this week, I didn't bring anything stupid that I found on Instagram or TikTok or Twitter. Did you find anything ridiculous?
I actually did find something a little fun while I was doing research for this episode.
Okay.
It's like really non-consequential, but it's one of those stats that I think is kind of fun to look at. And it's that Dak Prescott actually made football history, NFL history, during the Sunday night game this week.
I'm a little worried to hear what stat you're gonna bring up because I unfortunately had him on my fantasy football team get 3 fantasy points. So
you already know the brass tacks of what happened in that game.
Yes, scoregami.
It was scoregami, and not only that, during that game, Dak Prescott became the first ever NFL quarterback to throw 2 interceptions in one game over 2 different days.
Oh my god, because of the delay.
Exactly. There's usually a contract for Sunday night games that they have to end by 11:59:59 because it's a Sunday night game. It can't become Monday Night Football. But when there's a rain delay, there's an exception. And in this case, the rain delay lasted long enough that the game lasted past midnight, where Dak Prescott gave up his second interception of the game, making him the first ever quarterback in NFL history to throw 2 interceptions in one game on 2 separate days.
That is wild.
Yeah, I thought that was a pretty fun fact.
Yeah. All right, so what's this episode that you came across this?
Well, it's funny, because now that we've talked about this, I feel like we talked about more football than we're going to for pretty much the rest of the episode. This is not going to be like the typical Football Conspiracies episode that we usually bring you guys. Like I just mentioned, there's going to be almost no talk of football at all. We've kind of gotten through most of the talk of it. Instead, what I've brought to you is a tale of mobsters, murders, corruption, and corpses. Today, we'll be speaking about the death of Jimmy Hoffa. A lot of you are probably wondering at this moment, what place would Jimmy Hoffa possibly have on a Football Conspiracies podcast? And that is honestly a completely fair question. But before we get to the answer, we first have to speak about the man himself. So, who was Jimmy Hoffa?
As far as I'm concerned, Jimmy Hoffa was like a gangster mobster sort of in and he was closely related to JFK, if I remember correctly, something like that.
You're definitely you have the broad details of the story in your mind, and they're definitely not laid out properly. But yes, that is the general strokes. We'll get into it now because you actually know more than a lot of people do. Because like many people just know him simply as the guy Al Pacino was playing in that Martin Scorsese movie that lasted 3 hours too long. I don't know if you remember The Irishman. It came out a few years back. That story is about the mobs around Jimmy Hoffa and the craziness that went down during this tale. But it's not a particularly accurate story. We'll get a bit more into that later. But that is the popular reference a lot of people have in these days to Jimmy Hoffa. But back in the day, this guy was a big fucking deal. James Riddle Hoffa. I only bring up his last name because... Sorry, his middle name, because it's Riddle.
Riddle.
It actually isn't his middle name, it's his mother's maiden name, but who cares?
Still.
It's badass.
Still.
So James Riddle Hoffa was the president of the Teamsters Union from 1957 to 1971. So he actually wasn't a mobster first and foremost. That's what people think of him as. He was a union leader. Like he led one of the biggest unions in all of America. Still to this day, one of the biggest unions in all of America. Hoffa only rose to the position of president after his predecessor was arrested. So there was already some, maybe shady stuff going on in the background before Hoffa ever had his hands on the wheel. In his position as the president of the Teamsters Union, Jimmy Hoffa would turn himself into one of the most infamous men in the United States, and almost certainly the most well-known and best-remembered union leader of all time. And this is for several reasons. Like we had already mentioned, he was a mobster, but also this guy was like an incredibly successful union leader. Like this union grew by like leaps and bounds under his leadership. It went from like tens of thousands of people to like over 2 million people by the time he was done.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's quite something.
Exactly. Like, it was an influential local union, and he turned it into a hugely influential national union.
Wow.
So, as we've been referencing to for a while now, Hoffa is not best remembered for his jovial spirit and can-do attitude. He's remembered for the crimes he committed and his alleged status as a mobster. Should say alleged when we have these conversations.
Yeah, we'll make our own decisions at the end of this.
Exactly. In the end of the day, like, for legal reasons, we should technically say alleged, but I don't find it likely that the estate of Jimmy Hoffa is coming after us anytime soon.
You never know once this episode's out.
Exactly. You know what? We've had downloads in Russia and China after mentioning them, so who knows who's coming after us these days. So, during the early years of his time as the Teamsters president, Hoffa became involved in organized crime. His close ties with the mafia were pretty well documented, and like I said, you see a lot of them in The Irishman, like a lot of people listening to this have probably seen. Hoffa was accused of jury tampering, attempted bribery, conspiracy, and mail-and-wire fraud in 1964. A federal investigation of Hoffa's illicit activities was conducted by the Justice Department, specifically by JFK's Attorney General, his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, or better known as RFK.
So that's where that JFK connection comes in that I was thinking of, or is there more to the JFK?
We're actually going to get into that right now,
okay,
so that's perfect.
Okay.
They had a lot to do in each other's lives. You know, they were both at the peak of their power at the same time. But I also think, like, when discussing this story, it's just so interesting to see, like, how big the players involved were. Like, JFK, RFK, these are names that everyone everywhere knows, and Jimmy Hoffa has his hands all over it. So after this investigation, where RFK went after him, he was found guilty on all charges. In 1967, Hoffa was put in prison and handed a 13-year prison sentence. So now let's get a bit further into his relationship with the Kennedys, like we were mentioning before.
Yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned JFK's Attorney General in 1964, but JFK
was dead
not
in 1964.
Currently the president.
I should have been more specific. He was LBJ's Attorney General at the time, but he was picked by JFK because it was still during the original JFK term before LBJ took over.
Okay, I was just confused.
Exactly. Interestingly enough, LBJ would go on to win in 1964, and pick RFK as his Attorney General again. In 1968, when the elections came back around, or 1967, better yet, when the primaries were happening and they're trying to figure out who the Democratic candidate would be, LBJ had to drop out because RFK was so popular.
Yeah, okay.
He was then assassinated, and President Nixon was elected as a result. So, before JFK was ever the president, there was already really bad blood between the Kennedys and Hoffa. Famously, there's actually a photo of Jimmy Hoffa flipping off RFK during a Senate committee hearing in 1957, before JFK was president or he was Attorney General. In the 1960s presidential election campaign, which JFK would go on to win, is chock full of accusations of corruption and rigging, mostly by the Irish mob. And to this day, people still speak about allegations of the mob using its influence to push JFK into power.
Yeah, Jack Kirby. Didn't he have something to play in that thing?
Absolutely. It's a very contentious story. There's really, like, not too much evidence. Well, I take that back. There's a lot of evidence on either side, but it's really hard to come to a conclusion on it. I've seen smart people say it's rigged, smart people say it isn't, but for those people who are, like, so shocked about all the conversation of American elections being rigged in the past, like, few cycles, this isn't the first time we've seen this.
Yeah.
The reason it's so important to mention this relationship with JFK and the possible rigging of the election is because some of these allegations claim that the Teamsters Union was actually targeted by the Chicago outfit. The Chicago outfit being another name for the Irish mobsters who were working on behalf of the Kennedy campaign.
Okay, so we got a little territory war going on over here, or something like that.
Not quite a territory war, because obviously
we have,
the Teamsters and the Chicago outfit were fighting for different quote-unquote territory. Yeah. One was legal and one wasn't exactly. But yes, there's definitely a tension here where both of them hold a lot of power in a similar place, and they're both trying to wield their power for their own end. It's also really important to mention right now, Hoffa, for his part, publicly endorsed Richard Nixon, JFK's opponent in the upcoming presidential election. He was also not quiet about his disdain for the Kennedy clan as a whole.
Kennedy must have been anti-union.
Well, no.
But, yeah.
But As far as union leaders go, Hoffa wasn't particularly pro-union.
Okay.
It's also important to keep in mind that, like, these unions aren't exactly what we think of a union as today. It's not like, oh, like, Starbucks is trying to unionize and those people are trying to get work and, get better labor standards. Obviously, that is the basis of a union, but in the 60s, a lot of unions were just, cover-ups for organized crime, and they had a lot more influence on your life. Like, being part of a union was a big deal. There were union cities that you could live in. It was your entire life was this union.
Oh, wow.
Exactly. So it should be less shocking why the president of a union had so much power.
Yeah.
So regardless of the validity of these election tampering claims, the rocky relationship between the Kennedys and Jimmy Hoffa is very well documented. In 1967, when Hoffa was eventually imprisoned, much of the credit went to RFK, who spent a ton of social and political capital in his position of AG to go after Hoffa.
Well, I mean, you make powerful enemies, they're gonna come after you with their power.
Exactly. No, you said it perfectly. Reportedly, RFK actually had a group of confidants in the Justice Department on the Hoffa case who he referred to as the Get Hoffa Squad. Like, this was serious bad blood. After going to prison, Hoffa did not give up his position as one of the most influential union leaders in the country. In what I think is a kind of a badass move, he held on to his role as the president of the Teamsters from his jail cell.
Damn.
In 1971, approximately 4 years into his 13-year sentence, Hoffa struck a deal with the successor of JFK, previously mentioned President Richard Nixon, and it was agreed that in return for his freedom, Hoffa would resign as president of the Teamsters and stay out of all union activities until 1980, when his original sentence was meant to come to an end.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, like it's
and I'm sure he did some stuff on the side, I'm sure he was still a little sneaky about it.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a smell of corruption here.
Yeah,
considering
he was influential for Nixon in the 60s.
Exactly, like,
I mean, it still makes sense. Like, if you don't really want him to do something, but also like pay him back a little bit, makes sense.
Oh, I think
basically what, like a 9-year probation, basically against the union. Him, like,
yes,
yeah, okay.
I think like what Tricky Dick, another name for Nixon, for those who don't know, was up to.
You just wanted to say Dick.
Of course I did. So what I think he was up to was very smart from, like, the position of the President of the United States. But for Hoffa, it was also a pretty solid deal, just he had to give up the power that he so clearly craved.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, like, as a matter of fact, in an attempt to regain his position as president of the Teamsters Union, Hoffa appealed to have his temporary ban from the union activities overturned. However, he was unsuccessful in this attempt.
Should have just gotten like a little puppet,
A little
put your own, have him put the president in, then he runs through the president. So he isn't actually technically legally, but he still is.
From what I understand, it already was someone who was pretty subservient to Hoffa in the position of president after him, but Hoffa was under, like, really, really close watch. He was on a tight leash here.
Oh, okay.
So I think if he actually did get involved in union activities in any, like, noticeable way, I'm sure he had some small involvement, he would have been caught and sent back to jail, which was,
not what he wanted.
Ultimately, the only thing that's worse than not being the president of the union to him. Yeah. So after all of this, 4 years after he got out of jail, on July 30th, 1975, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared completely. 7 years later, in 1982, Hoffa had still not returned. It was decided he would be legally declared dead. While most theories point towards the mafia as the most likely perpetrators of the crime, there is still a lively debate surrounding the eventual fate of Jimmy Hoffa.
I mean, it seems really easy to blame the mafia. Just be like, oh, it was a hit and they just took the body and made him swim with the fishes,
Well, yeah, but it's also easy to claim that because he had so much bad blood with the mafia.
Yeah, I know. That's what I mean.
Right?
Like, it's easy to say that, but like, we know the truth is never that easy.
That is true, but I think in terms of who the perpetrators of this crime were, there's less of a debate than what the ultimate mystery becomes, which is what we are going to be discussing today. So now that I've gone through a short biography of Hoffa's life, a lot of you are still probably wondering, like, yeah, that was interesting, but what the hell does this have to do with football?
Where's the football, Jared?
Yeah.
Where's the football?
I understand that. As I was writing this episode, I was like, okay, like, get to it, Jared. I understand. But where the story does become relevant, at least for the purposes of our podcast, that is, comes with the mystery of Hoffa's disappearance. Like I was saying earlier, while there does seem to be a general consensus among theorists regarding the perpetrators of the murder and their potential motivations, it was the mob and they were after Jimmy Hoffa for decades of bad blood, one thing that is still hotly debated is the whereabouts of Hoffa's corpse.
Well, I mean, maybe he's still alive. Maybe he just, disappeared and went to, a island in, the Caribbean or something like that. Maybe he's just, chilling with Tupac on, some random island somewhere.
I would not debate the fact that that's possible. There is a potential that that is the case. That being said, one thing out of all these theories of where his body went, I did not find the entire time was anyone claiming he was still alive, which I was shocked about. I thought, surely there's going to be people out there saying, oh, he ran off.
Yeah, he just ran away.
Exactly.
He just disappeared.
But no, I saw zero allegations. I'm sure they're out there somewhere, and I did some digging. But as far as it goes, the main theory here is everyone knows he's dead. Where's the body?
Oh.
I know.
So then why do they know he's dead?
Why do they know he's dead? I don't know, because as far as I'm concerned, the why he's dead evidence is as convincing of the this is where his body evidence is.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to that deeper soon, but it's very odd to me that people are so willing to fantasize about where his body could possibly be, but people just aren't as willing to be like, oh, but maybe he's in Cuba. I don't know. Personally, I think that's a logical step. I think he almost certainly is dead, and it would be kind of crazy to assume he wasn't. That being said, I don't see why that's any less crazy than some of the theories we're going to go over today.
Yeah, at this point, naturally, he might have died, but in 1975 when he disappeared, there's no reason.
Old, yeah.
There's no reason he couldn't have just been see you later off to South America, see you later off to Asia, see you later.
You're not going to have me arguing with you on this one. Yeah.
All right, so where is this quote-unquote body?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's funny that you say that, because the next line I have written here is the location of his dead body may seem incidental to most, which to you, it clearly seems like it is. But this has been one of the, if not the most enduring legacy of Jimmy Hoffa. To this day, people are still writing about his body and its potential location, with every person having a new idea of where it could possibly be. This mystery is still so intriguing that in the past decade, the New York Times alone has published upwards of 10 pieces on the subject.
So they literally write an article every year asking the question, where is Jimmy Hoffa?
No, new evidence comes out, so it's crazy.
Oh, there's just constantly evidence.
Constantly theories. Evidence is a strong word, I'm
gonna say.
Theories is definitely more accurate.
New theories.
Yes. And just in the past few years, Fox News, The Independent, NBC, and the BBC, just to start with those, have all published articles speculating about the mystery. So this is still hotly debated. We're 50 plus years out from this, and people are still shocked.
Yeah, Jimmy Hoffa's disappearance is 50 years next year.
It's 50 years next year.
Wow. Or maybe 50 years this year, depending on when you're listening to this podcast.
Ooh, spooky. So, obviously, the intrigue surrounding this story was completely natural. If I was around during this time, I'd be following this every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, the circumstances of his disappearance are simply too strange to be swept under the rug. So, to quote from Michael Wilson at the New York Times,
on July 30, 1975, Mr. Hoffa was in Bloomfield Township, Michigan, for a meeting to address this very situation. He was to sit down with Mr. Provenzano and another mobster at the Macus Red Fox, a popular restaurant. But when he arrived, the other two men were not there, and with that, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared. The FBI combed the restaurant's credit card receipts to track down potential witnesses from that day. A few said they saw Mr. Hoffa that afternoon out in front, where he got into the back seat of a car that drove away. Okay, now it makes a little more sense why people don't think he's alive. Because,
Yes.
I mean, that's a little sketchy. But also, maybe they were taking him to the airport.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Like, by that exact same logic that you brought up earlier, why can't he have just driven away with that was him and the boys
they were
off to Mexico?
Yeah, they were like, when you finish packing up your shit, meet me at this restaurant, and I'll be there waiting for you guys.
Exactly. Like, God knows where he went after this. There is obviously more evidence that we're going to get into, but this is the end of the Jimmy Hoffa story that we know factually. He was outside this restaurant, one of the most recognizable, powerful men in America, outside this popular restaurant, gets into a car, never seen again. Like, imagine that happening today.
It could never. There's too many cameras. There's cameras everywhere. They would be able to track your car. They would be able to see everything.
Exactly.
There's computer chips in your car.
Exactly. Like, the equivalent, I feel like, of, like, a big union leader in those days is, like, a big business leader today. Imagine, like, one day Elon Musk was just, like, at a restaurant, disappeared forever. I would never stop talking about that goddamn story.
No, that would be in the news forever.
Just like this. 50 years later, I would still be reading every article about the whereabouts of his body. So I understand why this is so long-lived, right?
Yeah.
So, considering all of this, it should be no surprise that the theories as to where Hoffa's body was hidden range from the mundane to, like, the ridiculously fantastical.
Okay, the most mundane is what I said earlier, where he's alive. Because that's a pretty boring place for a body to be.
Well, I feel like that's a very crazy place for a body to be. He'd be in, like, some other continent.
Yeah, okay, fine. Then the other way I mentioned before, with that he's swimming with the fishes.
Yeah,
that's
swimming
probably
with the
the
fishes
most boring.
is, for sure. I think that's the most boring.
Okay, what would the most exciting place for a body, for, like, his body to be?
We're not quite there yet.
Oh, okay.
Because
I want to speculate a little.
Because you can speculate on it, please.
I'm gonna think a little bit about it, and when I got an answer, I'll let you know.
I'll ask you before I reveal.
Okay.
Because I obviously wrote this episode, and I know all the theories of where his body is, so it's hard for me to speculate. But before we get into it, we'll have you guess. So, considering there's no concrete evidence of where he might be, authorities have been willing to take tips from pretty much any schmo who's willing to talk. This has resulted in many, many failed searches and tons of money wasted. No matter how legitimate the tip may seem, all investigations have completely failed to produce results.
If they're just going to investigate anything, I feel like trolls back then would just call and be like, hey, this field? We believe he might be buried in it. And then they have to dig up the entire field, and they find nothing, and they're like, oh, that was a waste of time, money, and a random thing.
I think that's pretty much what happened. I think the motivation was different. The motivation wasn't like trolling. I think it was more like trying to gain clout for themselves, as you'll see in shortly. But I think a lot of these tips definitely did come from people just kind of like pulling out their ass because they have an ulterior motive.
Yeah.
So one of the best known theories, probably the best known theories regarding the whereabouts of Jimmy Hoffa's body is that Frank Sheeran killed him. Why do people think this? Well, Frank Sheeran himself admitted to committing the crime. And the confession was documented by Charles Brandt in his book, I Heard You Paint Houses, Frank the Irishman Sheeran, and the Closing of the Case of Jimmy Hoffa. So, like I was mentioning earlier, this name and these circumstances might sound a little familiar to you, because these are the circumstances that play out in Martin Scorsese's film, The Irishman, which is based on this book I just mentioned.
Oh, if it's based on the book, then the book could be a little bit of revisionist history, Maybe this guy's got an ulterior motive. He doesn't want the real truth about Jimmy Hoffa to come out, so he gives a fake truth.
Well, I mean, this book, it's written by someone who isn't him, but this person claims to have interviewed Frank Sheeran, who admitted to murdering Jimmy Hoffa, and then also said where the body was hidden. So this is like a full-on admission.
Yeah, people give false admissions all the time. I feel like he's hiding the real truth.
But people give false admissions when they're under the duress of police who are trying to catch them for something that isn't their fault. People don't admit to things freely to authors when they could be held liable for murder based on that thing.
Yeah, but they obviously didn't find the body there, so he obviously didn't do it.
Well, this is big-time clout chasing as far as I'm concerned.
That's what I mean. Yeah. He obviously didn't do it.
Yeah, and as you obviously have gotten to yourself, since the release of this book in 2004, this theory has been highly criticized. At this point, few people, if any, actually believe and subscribe to this theory.
You know, if a book comes out about a historical event, it's probably a little bit of revisionist history.
Well, no.
A little bit.
I don't know if that's true because, like, I don't know, historians write books about history, and I think they're pretty good at documenting it. But I don't even think this was revisionist history. I think when the writer of this book, when he sat down, he genuinely had reason to believe this was the story. And that's because Frank Sheeran told him it was the story. There's no reason not to. But the nail in the coffin of this case is the fact that, according to the book, Sheeran admitted that he was in the car that picked up Hoffa outside that Michigan restaurant. They then drove to a house in Detroit where Sheeran shot Hoffa twice in the back of the head. According to Sheeran, that is. Investigations were conducted in the house where the alleged crime took place, and bloodstains were actually found. However, further forensic testing showed that the DNA samples collected did not match Hoffa's.
Yeah, and that's not surprising.
Exactly. So Sheeran was an actual hitman for the mob. We know this. Did he murder someone in that house?
Probably.
Yeah,
I mean,
there's some good chances.
I mean, if you're a hitman for the mob and if you're quote unquote bringing Jimmy Hoffa there, you probably brought a couple of other guys there before then too.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. He does paint houses, for those of you who get the reference. But as far as I'm concerned, this is big clout chasing. This guy wanted the attention. So whatever it was, he wanted a good book deal. So
wherever he claimed this body was, it wasn't actually there?
Well, he pretty much just claimed that they killed it, they cut him up, they threw him away. They threw him in a landfill or something. Yeah, exactly. Like it was a gone sort of situation.
Oh, okay.
And obviously, after they noticed that the blood stains didn't match up, there was no reason to dig into this further or even do a search for the body where he said it was going to be, where it obviously wasn't.
Yeah. Wait, they didn't even search the place where he said the body would be?
I think they might have said it was in the water. Like
the
Great Lakes or
water.
Something. Exactly. Like it wasn't, there was no recovering it from where. Yeah, exactly. So now with this episode length preamble aside, I will now share the most infamous theory of the whereabouts of Jimmy Hoffa's body. And finally, we are getting to why we're talking about this on this fucking podcast. J. Cole, where is the body hidden?
Based on this being a football podcast, I'm going to come out and guess that he's underneath, like, a football stadium.
You are absolutely correct.
No fucking way.
So, this tale, or I guess this theory, begins in 1989, when Donald, Tony the Greek Francos, sat down for an interview with Playboy magazine. So, first of all, like Tony Francos, he was like an infamous hitman and mob associate of the Lucchese family, one of the so-called 5 families that controlled the organized crime in New York City at this time period. So, like, he was working for the big dogs out there, and he was a very well-known and notorious hitman. Like, this guy could be relied upon. He's not bullshitting. He was killing people for money. This is absolutely the case. The second thing I need to say about him before we get into his story is his name is Donald, and then his nickname, Tony the Greek Francos. So, like, his nickname is Tony the Greek. His name is Donald Francos. I think that's so funny.
That's a great nickname.
Yeah, like, where did the Tony come from? Where did the, like,
maybe that's like his hitman name.
Oh, I assume the joke is he was working with Italian families and he's Greek, so they called him Tony the Greek. Exactly. I think that's where it comes from. That's my logic. I did not look into it, so that's total conjecture. But either way, I think it's kind of a fun nickname. So after all this, later, Francos would become a government informant, and that's how we know that a lot of the stories that he says are definitely true. So in his Playboy interview, Francos claimed that he knew where Hoffa's body was buried. And his answer, like J. Cole so rightly guessed, was under Section 107 of Giants Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey.
Oh, wow. See, when I was thinking stadium, I was thinking maybe he was under, like, the Bears Stadium because, you know, like Chicago.
Well, actually, he disappeared in Michigan, so...
Oh, yeah, so then Detroit.
The closest would be Detroit. But obviously, this still isn't Detroit.
Yeah, no, you would have had to go through Ohio, too, and then...
It's odd.
And then, yeah.
No, you got your geography right. And, like, most of the theories of where his body is do place it in Detroit or in the Michigan area. This, however... And this is an infamous theory. Like, people know about this. This is claimed that it's in New Jersey, obviously. And there's other theories that have it in way crazier places. Like, I read one theory that I was like, it's too melted for me to even start talking about it here. That says it's in Japan.
Like, his body's in Japan?
That's
like,
what they claim.
Dead body's in Japan.
That's what one theory claims.
How did he get there?
It doesn't matter. It didn't get there, is the answer.
Well, I mean, we don't know.
Unless it was thrown in the Atlantic or the Pacific and the waves brought it there somehow, that body's not in Japan, and I will stake my reputation on it.
Just some random Japanese collector. He's like really big fan of American things, and he just has like a frozen Jimmy Hoffa body and like in his display case in his basement.
It's like how you'll go into some churches and you'll see like, you know, the fingers of a saint or something.
Yeah,
exactly. Look, it's Jimmy Hoffa's nose. So to continue this theory of the giant stadium, in 1992, while speaking with the author William Hoffman, Frankos went even further, claiming that not only did he know where the body was, but that he was involved personally in the murder of Jimmy Hoffa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he went further and identified the three men in the car who were along with them, who were two of his fellow mafiosos.
Was one of them the guy from before?
Frank Sheeran? No.
Oh.
As Frankos tells the tale, the mafiosos were able to lure Hoffa into a home owned by a well-known Detroit mobster. Once in his home, the men shot Hoffa and dismembered his body. He then asserts that the body was sealed in an oil drum, which they proceeded to bury beneath Section 107 of the giant stadium.
Or they accidentally put it on a shipping container headed to Japan.
Oh, yeah, you know what? Maybe that's how it ended up there. You know what? I'm the crazy one. I take it back.
All right, so he's in an oil drum under 107?
Yeah, that's what the theory claims. Yeah, like, I know this is a pretty wild story, but it also explains why I spent an entire episode of a football podcast speaking about a mobster who died about half a century ago. I did promise this was football related, no matter how tangential that relationship was.
So, what did the FBI do?
The FBI did fucking jack shit, because they're the FBI.
But I figured they would be the ones
But someone did get on the case.
Okay.
And I trust these people far more than the FBI.
Well, that's not saying much.
No, and you're right, that isn't saying much. But I trust these two, like, as much as I trust my parents. And I know you're going to agree with me here. These are some of my favorite scientists in the world. And if I trust anyone to verify the story, it's these guys. I shit you not, the Mythbusters.
Fuck yes.
Absolutely. The Mythbusters took on the Jimmy Hoffa case.
What?
Absolute legends. They will never let me down.
Never.
So, in an episode of their legendary television show, and I cannot express how legendary I mean, in this episode titled Buried Under Concrete, Adam Savage and Jamie Hyneman, the A-team of the Mythbusters, attempted to prove or disprove the story once and for all. The two Mythbusters went down to Giant Stadium to see for themselves. They decided to conduct tests with special equipment used to see if there were any contents underground. Radar and ground spectrometry, it's called something like that.
Yeah.
Nothing I understand.
Yeah, like fancy scientific devices that let you see through concrete.
Exactly.
Wow.
The team went straight to Section 107 and a bunch of other places where the body could potentially have been. The Mythbusters' verdict? Busted. No Jimmy Hoffa body was found under Giant Stadium.
See, I'm a big fan of the Mythbusters, but sometimes they aren't the most scientific in their experiments.
No, you're right.
And sometimes I'm like, okay, come on. But like I would trust them to use a spectrometer
exactly
thing. Like it's easy to point something at the ground and be like, oh, there isn't anything there.
Exactly. Like, no shade towards the guys. I love them so much. But you're right. Like, I watched these shows as a kid, and I was like, these guys are brilliant. Everything they say, 100% gospel. And I've watched some episodes more recently and been like, maybe the scientific method wasn't followed to the T.
Yeah, like they're kind of accurate most of the time.
Exactly.
Like, I take them, when they say something's busted or true, they're usually right.
I take it pretty seriously. Not fully. Like, my whole heart doesn't go into it, but they've convinced me. At least a little bit.
I feel like we're talking about Mythbusters more than we are about football.
Bring back, like, this is just gonna be a Mythbusters podcast, honestly. Like, I'm for it. Mythbusters Busters. Yeah. Don't steal that. I will fuck you up.
I'm cutting that from the episode, bro. That's gonna be in the next episode.
That's gold.
That's the next series.
Yeah, what do you mean? This isn't even happening anymore. This is officially the last episode of Football Podcast. Football Conspiracies.
We are now a Mythbusters review. We will watch an episode and tell you whether or not we trust the myth to be true or false.
It's not a bad idea. I'd listen to it. So it's a good thing that we don't need to trust solely on the Mythbusters, because they obviously didn't complete a full excavation, and I understand if you don't consider their scan of the ground to be, full, complete, solid evidence. But for those who don't believe that this is the case, there was a full excavation done. So,
they did it.
Not the Mythbusters, of course.
No, but someone actually did it.
Yeah, exactly. In 2010, the Giants got a new stadium. So they
Yeah,
demolished
MetLife.
their old one. Exactly. They demolished their old stadium, and during the demolition job, they were specifically looking out for it because they knew the rumors existed. No bodily remains were found of any sort.
Well, I'm sure they were probably easy enough to find an oil drum in concrete when you're tearing down a stadium.
Exactly.
You know?
If it was allegedly in the oil drum, it almost certainly would have been found.
Exactly.
If it was organic matter, who knows? But either way, it wasn't found.
Yeah, okay.
So that's kind of the end of the football-related part of this podcast episode. I know it wasn't the most football-focused episode we have, probably the least football-focused episode we have, but I still think this is a more than worthwhile story.
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy Hoffa might have been underneath the Giants stadium at some point.
Yeah, probably not. I doubt it, but I was going to tell this story no matter what, so I hope you guys enjoy. And you know what? At this point, I don't want to leave the audience hanging, so we're going to play this out. I'm sure a lot of you guys are kind of dying to know at this point, where did his body eventually turn up?
It turned up? I thought it was missing.
Yeah, unfortunately, no, it has not turned up. I wanted to pull the rug on you there. However, there have been some pretty convincing leads in recent years. There has been some pretty credible evidence leading to a New Jersey landfill, or, like you were saying, the bottom of the Great Lakes. But for the purposes of our podcast, there is one lead that I think we must discuss. Some evidence suggests that his body is buried in the shadow of the Milwaukee Brewers MLB stadium. I know it's not football, but I think this is insane. Like, what are the odds that there's theories that his body is buried under two different major league sports stadiums? Or not under, but close to.
How the fuck did he get to Milwaukee from Michigan? That's like just as wild as saying he was in New Jersey.
No, this is even more melted. But this is not totally disproven. And this is very recent, too. In this case, and this was in 2023, investigators narrowed down their search to a Little League baseball diamond that is just outside the Brewers Stadium. The independent investigators, who are part of a non-profit group called the Case Breakers, claim that Hoffa's body was relocated in 1995. It was then subsequently placed beneath third base of this aforementioned baseball diamond. At the time of the alleged burying, the field was still a parking lot, so it's just where third base is now.
Okay.
Yes.
So third base is haunted by Jimmy Hoffa.
I mean, gonna have to ask these kids. Like, I wonder if there's any extra errors there. Who knows? So, to summarize the Case Breakers investigations, and let me reiterate this, the Case Breakers is like this independent, non-profit, cold case investigators. So, take everything that they say with a grain of salt. But to summarize the Case Breakers investigations, we will now quote from Graham Massey at The Independent.
The Case Breakers say that they used radar, which was blocked by an unexpected clay layer that they say indicates a dig at the site that had been hurriedly excavated and backfilled. The group then brought in a top cadaver dog named Moxie to the site with the retired police officer handler, Karen Korokoran. With the dog giving positive signs several times, this gal has, I believe the figure is, over 200 cases of finding either the dead or the missing, founder Thomas Colbert told Fox News Digital. She's phenomenal, and she brought in her dog, and where does the dog go? Right to the ground penetration radar spot 3 years earlier, and that's where we got excited. The group says that Moxie pointed, wagged, barked, and nosed her way into 4 hits at the stadium's old third base location.
So what do you think of that?
Okay, this is like the most obvious proof that the FBI needs that there is a body underneath this baseball stadium. Like, I don't know if it's Jimmy Hoffa, but there's a body.
It's a little weird.
Cadaver dogs are usually pretty right, especially one that has over 200 successes.
Exactly, and like, I'm not gonna lie, the unexpected clay layer, a little sketchy.
Yeah, and the dog went straight to the spot that was 3 years earlier investigated. That's a little sketchy too.
I agree. Like, I am a little skeptical just because I've never heard of this organization before, but I also haven't done any research into them. For all I know, I could like research them and they could be like 100% of cold cases taken unsolved. Like, I have no idea. Like, these guys could be the real fucking life mystery team. I have no idea. But as far as I'm concerned, what they have brought up is, at the very least, some pretty sketchy things that need to be looked into, regardless of Jimmy Hoffa or not.
Yeah. Yeah, like there is a body there. It might not be Jimmy's, but there is a body there.
Yes, exactly. So like I was saying, this investigation occurred in 2023. Well, the casebreakers have attempted to bring the FBI to the site. No progress has been made. So we come to the end of this episode knowing nothing more about the whereabouts of Jimmy Hoffa's body, and certainly nothing more about football.
Yeah, so Jimmy Hoffa is either swimming with the fishes underneath a baseball stadium in Milwaukee, or
there's a couple other
in Japan.
People say that
Cuba.
People say that they melted his body with acid.
Acid makes sense.
People say that he was buried, like chopped up and buried in concrete. There's a lot of theories.
Okay.
But
no one will ever know?
Nothing fruitful. I wouldn't say no one will ever know, because if the New York Times keeps releasing their yearly articles, interest will stay up and maybe they'll find him one day. But I think you're probably right. I think this is probably a cold case that is always going to stay that way.
All right. So, as opposed to Jared, who decided to not talk about football, I'm going to decide to talk about football.
I feel like I'm catching strays. Like, I don't know what's going on here.
No, this was a direct shot. I don't know. I was just thinking recently, I'm a big racing fan, especially F1, and when I started to get into F1, I was like, oh, if you name a location in a year, you'll bring back memories, especially if it was like an iconic race.
Oh yeah, this is like, totally us talking about football. Yeah.
But I was thinking like, oh, I'm sure that football, of course, with its super long history, has had tons of iconic games and tons of iconic plays. But football has the fun aspect of naming them fun things.
That is true.
So I figured we'd look back. I'm not going to go too far back. Like, I'm going to stick within the past 20-ish years. Mm-hmm. But I'm just going to list some fun football games and some of the ridiculous plays that happen to give these football games their fun names.
Lovely.
I figured that we should start with your Buffalo Bills.
I already know this is going to be a devastating loss.
September 25th, 2022. They only lost by 2 points to the Dolphins, but the game has a fun play.
Which one was this?
The butt punt.
Of course.
It worked in your favor, though. Dolphins punter Thomas Morstead kicked the ball straight into the butt of Trent Sherfield due to him lining up too close to the end zone. Rolled out, ended up being a safety.
That's such a funny play. That's so good.
Yeah.
Like, I understand it worked out in my team's favor, but, like, who cares about all that? That is objectively hilarious.
Yeah, so funny. And, of course, its predecessor, the butt fumble.
Of course, we all know the
iconic play where Mark Sanchez just runs straight into his teammate's butt.
Yeah.
And just fumbles the ball.
Yeah.
And then the Patriots linebacker picked it up.
Just got full of cake.
Yeah, that's a pretty good way to get a touchdown. Your opposing quarterback runs into their lineman's ass.
Oh, it's so, like, it's the quarterback's dream, you know? Like, that's probably what they're thinking about when they were a young boy, you know, lying in bed one day.
There have also been some iconic plays, got some iconic names. Minneapolis Miracle was when, in the 2017-2018 playoff game, when the Vikings, Stephon Diggs, remember when he used to play there?
Weird, yeah.
He caught that pass and, like, jumped over to the Saints defenders. Like, they both missed their tackles, and he ran it in and scored the game-winning touchdown. It was an insane play, and it had a part 2.
Did it?
A Minneapolis Miracle Part 2 was the name of the game that took place in 2022. It is the largest comeback in NFL history. The Vikings overcame a 33-0 halftime score to win the game 39-36.
That's crazy. Against who?
The Colts.
That's wow. I don't remember that game.
Yeah, that was insane.
That was insane.
Yeah, it was a good game. There's also the 316 game, which I bring up because we all know how much Jared likes the numerology of everything.
You know, right? I do.
So in 2012, there was a playoff game between the Broncos and the Steelers, and 5 different statistics finished with the 3 digits in the order set 3, 1, and 6.
Okay.
When Tim Tebow played Florida for the Florida Gators back in 2008, he wore black paint under his eyes with the inscription John 3:16 underneath them.
Damn.
During the game, Tim Tebow accumulated 316 passing yards, with an average of 31.6 yards per completion. The Steelers finished the game with the time of possession 31 minutes and 6 seconds. The game's ratings peaked between 8 and 8:15 with a rating of 31.6. Ben Roethlisberger threw a second quarter interception on a 3rd and 16. 3-1-6.
I like it. I like it. You know I'm partial to some numerology. It's obviously bullshit like always, but damn, like Tim Tebow and everything, like you couldn't write it better than that.
Yeah, so 316, and he won the game.
Well, of course he did. And then he went to church immediately after.
Yeah. What do you mean? His Bible was sitting in his locker. He went straight back there to read it right after the play.
They probably had to have like a locker room chapel just for him.
A couple of other fun plays. There was the double doink, where Cody Parkey in the wild card game had a double doink, and the Bears ended up losing to the Eagles by 1 point.
Oh no!
Yeah,
that hurts.
That hurts. And it was like final play of the game, the kick.
Really?
Yeah, it was a brutal one, but probably the most infamous double doink in the past like 20 years. Yeah, and I think we're gonna finish it off on the Hail Mary. On the final play of the game, Russell Wilson threw a Hail Mary pass to the end zone to Golden Tate. Both Tate and the Packers defender, M.D. Jennings, got their hands on the ball in the attempted catch. Both 2 officials watching the play, one called interception, the other one called a touchdown.
What?
Yeah. They went to review, they called it a touchdown. Okay. After, though, it was viewed in the replay that Tate pushed off of a different receiver, should have called an offensive pass interference, which would have negated the touchdown and would have given the Packers the victory. Suffice it to say, the Seahawks got the touchdown. Controversy ensued, but the Packers did not get the win.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so Hail Mary, not because it was a failed Hail Mary, but because the play in itself was a fail by everyone involved.
Oh, seriously, yeah. Like, that's a... To be fair, I don't know how it's called on that situation. 2 guys have the ball in their hands at the same time.
Yeah, both of them came down with it.
So who does it go to?
Exactly. One called touchdown, one didn't, and so they review.
The reasoning, I'm never going to understand why they did what they did, but it hardly matters.
It's controversial. Shouldn't have gone that way, but it did in football.
At least it has a good name.
Yes. Hail Mary.
Hail Mary.
Yeah. So, football, yeah. Fun games, fun plays, good history. I don't know.
Good sport. Good yes.
I don't know. I'm a fan of the sport and weird plays, weird numbers.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode.
You can find us on Twitter at FB Conspiracies, where we will post all the graphics and links we spoke about during this episode.
You can also reach us by email using fbconspiracies@gmail.com.
A special thanks to Blaze for the music.
If you enjoyed, consider leaving a review.
Join us next week for more Football Conspiracies.
So
Yeah, I just noticed that.
a needlepoint and thread.